Hello and welcome to Hot Topic. I'm Hugh and I'm with Andrew Wilson, the Lincolnshire advisor for the National Farmers Union. Andrew, many thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
We start off with perhaps a controversial element, the Common Agricultural Policy, which we pay for. We vastly subsidise the European Union to pay for the Common Agricultural Policy, which is a lot of money paid to farmers. Effectively, everybody who's not a farmer is subsidising the farmers. Why?
Well, I think the key way to look at it is you're not subsidising farmers, you're subsidising the food prices that you pay in the supermarket. Certainly without the Common Agricultural Policy there to subsidise farmers, you wouldn't be able to buy food at the level that you're buying food at the moment, because that's the level that supermarkets are willing to pay for it, and the price that the farmer actually sells it for would not be profitable. So therefore the subsidy is there in order to produce the food and sell it at the price which is fitting for the customer.
But the Common Agricultural Policy buys food at a higher rate than buys food from the farmer at a higher price than the market would dictate. So the Common Agricultural Policy artificially raises the price of food.
If you have a year like 2012, for example, when we had the bad rains over the harvest period over here, the yields were down in this country, and the price of crops at that particular point as well just simply wouldn't have been profitable for farmers to have grown food. You would have seen farmers going out of business, and therefore you wouldn't have had the food in the supermarket. So therefore the agricultural policy is there to put a benchmark in the market so food is produced at a price that the consumer is willing to pay.
But if that food couldn't have been sold profitably that year, that's because people would have been buying food from other sources. They would have been buying food that was coming from somewhere else at a lower price. Why would we be subsidising an industry which, for whatever reason, can't match a competitor's lower price?
Well, it can. If the wheat's traded on a global market, for example, so if wheat in the UK is very, very cheap, the world will want UK wheat. If wheat in the UK is very expensive, the world won't want UK wheat. So we have to export wheat and we have to import wheat. It's a market structure, and therefore the Common Agricultural Policy does put a level in there which enables a steady food supply, and you don't have the risk of high food inflation and also food security issues.
But equally, you don't have the risk of food prices going down.
Well, you do have that. The supermarkets certainly are trying to do that at the moment. You do see that food prices will constantly try and go down and make farmers, even with the agricultural policy, struggling to make a profit. If you don't have a profit in farming, you don't have food. So therefore, the agricultural policy and the subsidy system enables the food to be produced. One point I would like to make is that farmers certainly do not like to be a subsidised industry. They would rather have no subsidies, be able to sell the crops at a price that they could make a profit at. It doesn't put a great deal of pride in the industry that it is reliant on subsidies, but unfortunately that is the case and the model that we have at the moment. But I do think over time we will certainly see the subsidies taper out, and we are seeing that. The subsidies paid to farmers today are certainly not the same as the subsidies paid 10 years ago.
It would be sad if farming disappeared in this country, but we have all sorts of other industries that have disappeared in this country. We don't have any shipbuilding industry. We don't have, I think one of the last coal mines is about to close. And yet we don't maintain those industries artificially. Why is agriculture more precious to everybody else for some reason to maintain that industry?
Well, food security, I think, is one of the most crucial things. If you had a situation where people were suddenly going 2 days without food, you would have a very problematic situation here in the country. So therefore it's vitally important that you do have a steady, consistent food supply in the UK.
Well, we can import food. I mean, we import all sorts of other things. We don't go without. And we import them because they're cheaper or better from other countries than they are than what's home produced. We're not going to go without food. We're not going to be. There is no U-boat menace. We're not going to go without food simply because we're not producing it in this country.
Yeah, if you're importing food into the UK, first of all, you would be paying a higher price for it. You've got to transport it over to here. The food produced in this country is the highest quality food produced in the world. And we also have a government that seems to support the agricultural industry at the moment. So therefore, I would certainly say the argument to go around the world chasing the cheapest food deal, we have previously done that with ready meals and meat, and that landed us in the Horsegate saga, which the general public wasn't very happy with. So therefore, by producing high quality food in this country, we're not going around chasing the cheapest deal. We're getting good quality food at a price consumers are prepared to pay for in this country. And
yet, as you say, it is an international, a global trading of food, and as we can tell from the supermarkets, there is food imported from outside the EU, which is undercutting British and EU produced food. And that's why the supermarkets are in a position to dictate the price so heavily.
That food is always the cheaper alternative.
Yeah.
If it's not produced to the same standards that it is in the UK. Certainly when European legislation is made on animal welfare, for example, the UK seems to gold plate that legislation, and then our food is produced here to the very letter and the highest possible standards, whereas you will have some other member states in Europe that don't comply to exactly the same legislation as we do in the UK, which enables them to produce food at a lower price. I would say the key things for a good, healthy country is to have high quality food at a price that people are prepared to pay, and also to be self-sufficient in our own food, and I think that's vitally important for the UK.
Would you tell a Frenchman that British food is of a higher quality than French?
Absolutely.
What sort of response would you expect?
He's French, I'm English, we'd never agree, but
yeah. Talking of food quality, we're told that we should be eating many more vegetables. 7 portions of vegetables a day. I mean, it seems such a chore, but how can we have better access to fresh food cheaper?
Well, I think the fresh food actually is one of the cheaper food groups out there. Certainly with fruit and vegetables, potatoes, for example, are trading at similar levels that they were in the 1970s. They haven't gone up with inflation at all. So I think fruit and veg in this country are quite competitively priced. I think the 5 a day scheme that was run was very good. It sort of stuck in people's head, 5 a day. It was quite an interesting concept, but it was one that worked. Increasing that to 7 a day, I think we're all going to suddenly have to think, well, where are these extra fruit and vegetables going to come from? Are we going to have sort of meat and 4 veg for our evening meals in the evening? But
well, if we don't live forever, it'll feel like it, won't it? But what's wrong with the distribution chain? I mean, what's wrong with the distribution? What's wrong with shoppers? What's wrong with the market that we all go and pick stuff off the aisles, off the shelves, that's been processed, that's been tinned, that's been frozen? Where can we go to buy more directly from the farmer, from the gate to the plate? How can we make that quicker?
Well, it's very quick at the moment. If you look here in Lincolnshire, in South Holland, we produce, I think it's about 40% of our country's fresh leafy salads, vegetables, and sort of, I suppose potatoes as well to a certain extent are produced in the South Holland area. If you go and look around some of those veg packers, you will see a cauliflower, for example, that will come off the field. It will get put into a little cellophane wrapper, it will get chilled, and it will be out to the supermarket that evening, and it will be on the shelves the next day. So you will have a maximum of a 24-hour turnaround with fresh food coming out of a field in South Lincolnshire to a supermarket anywhere in the UK, which is a very quick, efficient supply chain. So you can go into one of the top supermarkets, buy food in there that is UK produced, and know that it's been produced to very high standards here in Lincolnshire, and it's also very good quality. So I think in the fresh sense of food, we do actually have a very efficient supply chain on there. The consumers and the packers work very closely with the supermarkets to make sure that they are coming out there. Frozen peas, for example, are frozen within hours of coming off the field, and they're one of probably the best examples of fresh frozen food.
How about the idea of just buying directly from the farmer? I mean, farmers' markets have been springing up all over Lincolnshire and Yorkshire recently. Is that not a second way of farmers making money?
I'm sure you'd have many farmers that would be more than delighted to supply direct to the consumer, but I suppose it's the practicalities of actually doing that. We've all become very accustomed to going to supermarkets to buy our food. You do have the niche food industry, such as the farmers' markets. Farm shops do seem to be having a real renaissance at the moment. They're very popular, and people like to use them. But are you going to get busy working families using those on a daily, weekly basis? Probably not. They are a little bit more expensive, but you do get very good quality food from them, and it does supply a bit of extra money back into the food chain. But to farm in the volume that we need, I think it will be very difficult to use that as a supply chain.
We'll stop there, Andrew. Thanks very much. Please join us again after this short break. Welcome back to Hot Topic. I'm talking to Andrew Wilson of the National Farmers Union. Andrew, we were saying earlier on that agriculture isn't necessarily economically viable in an absolutely free market, that much of that land wouldn't make money, which is why much of it is set aside and other purposes are being found for it, like biofuels. We'll come back to that in a moment. But we live in a country with a housing crisis. We don't have enough housing. One of the solutions to that is to simply build more houses. There's land that's not economically viable as agriculture. Could that land not be turned into homes?
Well, it's very difficult to put residential planning consent on farming. Once again, I'm sure you'd have many farmers that would quite happily sell a bit of land that wasn't that productive on an agricultural basis for planning for residential housing. But the current planning laws we have at the moment make that very, very difficult to do. Most houses that are built on farms have to have agricultural ties to them, so therefore it is very difficult in order to get that done. But a point you made sort of prior to that with land on set aside and on not economically viable. Set-aside land in this country now is probably one of the lowest cases that it's ever been. There's very little land actually put into set-aside, and what land that is actually put into environmental schemes is governed by Brussels, and the European Union sort of insists that certain parts of the farms are actually put into environmental schemes. Farmers would quite happily drill from hedgerow to hedgerow and produce as much food as they possibly could, but the EU legislation is stopping them from doing that, and they are actually having to put in lots of different environmental schemes in order to please the environmental groups.
I understand that, but just on the housing issue again, it's a matter of the planning laws. That farmers and owners of land can't turn that land into residential land if they want to. What is the NFU doing to lobby against that, if it is?
Certainly on the planning issues at the moment, we're always trying to make planning easier for farmers. We do have a team in our head office which do work on planning laws, but that's generally for planning for improving agricultural buildings, or if you're looking at starting an agricultural venture. As a farming organisation, we wouldn't really be supporting farmers that were selling land to build houses on, because we would see that as the detriment of agriculture. We would rather see farmers putting in planning applications to put up new grain stores, to put up broiler units, that kind of thing.
Detriment to agriculture, but not necessarily the detriment to the agriculturalists who would be making money out of that land sale.
They would be making money out of it, but we're here to support farmers to farm. We're not here to support farmers to become property entrepreneurs.
Okay. It would help the residents of the countryside, though, wouldn't it? Because one of the great problems of rural England, rural Britain, is that so many villages become too expensive for the villagers to live in because of the housing crisis. And so it may not be the farmers themselves and the landowners themselves, but it'll be the people who work that land and work for those farms who find themselves finding it very difficult to find anywhere to live. What increase in village housing could mitigate that circumstance?
Well, I think in some areas of the country that's probably correct. I think you are seeing, certainly if we look sort of further in the southeast, in areas such as Norfolk, we're seeing very nice country villages where the people that live and work in those villages the next generations are being priced out. I would say probably here in Lincolnshire we're seeing a bit of the reverse. I think we're seeing the younger people move to the towns and cities where the jobs are, because we don't have the infrastructure here in the county. We don't have the direct bus routes, the public transport, for example, broadband. And we don't have the industries in the rural areas at the moment to support, I suppose, larger communities in the way that we used to. Farming employment on farms has gone down no end as it's become more of a mechanised industry. So the farms are actually employing less people at the moment. So we are probably seeing people move out of villages and not many people moving back to them. So I'd probably say we have the reverse situation here in Lincolnshire.
And on those people who are employed on the farms, that's a great controversy that's been going on at the moment about the nature of immigration, especially after EU expansion and the Bulgarian and Romanian rules relaxed to allow them to come into this country. Why is it that farmers would prefer to employ Polish people or Romanian people or Czech people to harvest their crops than the local villagers?
Yeah, I think it's a myth that farmers would prefer to employ Polish people or Lithuanian people to work on their land. When farmers advertise for a job on the farm, they're looking for the best candidate. And the best candidate for harvesting Brussels sprouts or picking cabbages, for example, the manual labour on farms is all from Eastern European workers. They're prepared to work the hours and they're prepared to do the job. And we're struggling as an industry to find English people to do those jobs. So
they're not skilled jobs. You don't have to be very long trained to pick a Brussels sprout. Why is it that the English people are not available to do that work? Or why do they not want to? Why is it so unattractive? Or why is some other option more attractive if they're looking for a job?
That's a wider political question, but from a farming point of view, when you see when jobs are advertised, for example, for these labouring jobs, the jobs are put out to everybody to do. And I think the farming industry has soon gotten on that the people that are willing to put in the hours and to put in the hard work are sadly not from this country anymore.
Moving on to a more local issue, we've had a winter of floods, perhaps not in this part of the country as bad as in other parts of the country, but we've certainly had a tidal surge over the winter that was frightening, much agricultural land damaged. What would the NFU advocate should be done about that?
Well, the NFU has been quite vocal on that. We had the tidal surge on December the 4th this year, which impacted the South Humber villages quite a lot, one coming along from sort of Ferriby through to up to, I suppose, Hawkstow area along there was hit very harsh by the tidal surge. We also had the Jubilee Bank at Boston, which breached with the tidal surge. Now, there's a real balance here with flood defences are there to protect homes and to protect residents, because that's where the commercial value is seen in flood defences. It's sort of, they will spend so much, the Environment Agency will spend so much on a flood defence when they see the value of what they're protecting. Now, what we're saying from a farming point of view is you have the vast majority of the farmland sort of in Lincolnshire and East Anglia is sort of around a 5% contour above sea level. So it's very marginal. As soon as you get like an increase in the tidal surge or you get high water, this farmland can flood. So we're saying there's a value to this farmland and you need to protect the farmland to a similar extent that you are doing the housing, and that's what we're pushing the Environment Agency to look at doing.
Just what is the damage of seawater flooding farmland? I mean, if you salt the soil, presumably it's infertile for a while, is it?
It is, yeah. Salinity levels in soil can be very damaging, and we're still at the stage at the moment where we're not quite sure what the damage is to the crops. Until we harvest the crops and we see what the yield is, we will not know what the damage of the salt water is to the crops, because it does kill the root structure.
That damage is done to that private industry that's growing those crops, that business. Why is it that that the public purse should be paying for the defences that defend that business? That is that fair? Is that, you know, are there other businesses that we defend out of the public purse?
Well, the public purse defends the villages, the roads as well. So it's not specifically for the farmland. You do have the independent drainage boards, which farmers do contribute money towards, which clear the waterways around the fields where the land drains come off and drain it. So farmers do shoulder quite a big responsibility of flood protection for their own land. But from what the Environment Agency does, particularly the South Bank of the Humber, the Jubilee Bank at Boston, that's protecting residential housing and roads as well. So it's not specifically farmland that it's protecting.
And how about land insurance? How easily available is it to farmers to insure land against natural disasters, to natural catastrophes?
Yeah, it's quite difficult. There are certain schemes such as interruption for business, for example, which farmers can claim for. But if you have a field of crops drilled and the seawater comes over and destroys those crops, you can't insure for that. So for a farmer, that's a total loss for him. Plus he's got the salt damage to the soil structure. So it is quite a big thing for a farmer if that happens.
In the final moments, recent news is that the culling of badgers in other parts of the country has pretty much been demonstrated to be a failure. Princess Anne has said that they should be gassed rather than shot. Other people think they should be vaccinated. What's your opinion?
Well, our opinion is, and we want to be straight on this, I think the NFU has an image that we are just pro-shooting badgers, which we lobbied for that because we thought that was the best thing to do.
Well, I must make it very short, sorry, coming up to the end. Shooting, vaccination, gassing, or leaving them alone?
We're after the best solution to get TB free of cattle.
Okay.
So that's the best solution.
All right. Thanks very much, Andrew. We must leave it there. My thanks to Andrew Wilson of the National Farmers Union. Please join us again for the next Hot Topic. Goodbye.